Hi, this is Professor Tiffany Martin in medical microbiology, and we are working our way through chapter 1. And we just understood that Robert Koch was the first scientist to match a particular microorganism with a particular disease. And many others followed since then, and that was what was going on in that time period. All right, so this video is a little interactive, so I want you to be able to think a little bit on this one. So I'm going to show you a picture. And I want you to take a few minutes and write down some observations. What do you see and what's going on? Now, again, this time period, we've just figured out what causes diseases. When we find out what causes something, the biggest thing we want to know is how to prevent it. So look at this picture, make some observations. Time period, dress, what are they doing? Just look through anything and write a few things down. Okay, so you wrote some things down, and then I asked you, would you want to be this patient? My guess is most of you said no. I then asked you, do you think this person is a bad doctor? I don't know what your answers were on that. Most of the time, probably not a bad doctor. This is obviously a picture from a certain time period, not today. We obviously do things very different today, but at this time period, he was probably doing the best he could with the knowledge he had available. And that's all we can ask. So remember as we go through this course, as we go through, a time period, and sometimes it gets frustrating when things change, when the medical community says, wear masks. No, don't wear masks. Okay, maybe you can wear masks. Well, these people should wear masks. It's frustrating sometimes when recommendations change from that. You can get it from groceries. Wipe it down from your groceries. Don't wipe it down. You really can't get it. That's not the primary mode of transmission. Again, you can't always know everything at any point in time. So what science does is it's constantly reevaluating, constantly using that scientific method to test and make sure you're getting cause and not correlation, that this is happening because of that. A lot of the changes were that an initial study came out saying that the virus was present. These lecture videos are being made during our quarantine kind of period with SARS-CoV-2. Initial studies came out saying that it was still present on items. 6 hours later, it's present in the air. 3 days later. After that, they did some more research, and they found that, yes, the DNA was present, which is how that study initially did, but it wasn't infectious. The DNA was not part of the infectious virus, and it couldn't be transmitted. Now, again, contact transmission, the touching things where a virus was, is still possible for this COVID-19 and this transmission, but it's not likely, and it doesn't stay as long as we think. Again, all you can do is make the best recommendations with the information you have available, and then constantly be searching for more information. So keep that in mind through this course, through your career, and just do the best that you can. And that's all you can ask. Okay, so let's go back to the PowerPoints. Hopefully you got to discuss this. I would love for you to take this to your study groups and maybe discuss it a little further on that. And I definitely want you to discuss this next slide that we're going to talk about. All right, we're in a time period now, and I'm actually going to take you back a little further in time to the 1700s, maybe early 1800s, and we're going to talk about a physician named Edward Jenner. And Edward Jenner is known for being the first physician to develop a vaccine for smallpox. And this was a big deal. Again, prevention. We didn't know what caused diseases, so it was very difficult to prevent them. So this was one of the first tools that they had. Now, before vaccination, which you are familiar with, there was a process called variolation. Variolation you may not be familiar with. It was practiced mostly in countries in the Far East. European explorers went into that, observed practices, brought them back. It was done in England, especially among the wealthy at this period of time, late 1700s, early 1800s, and it was a way to protect themselves against the disease. Now, smallpox. You may not be very familiar with it. We don't have that. It actually has been eradicated. The disease has not been seen on this planet due to successful vaccination techniques, so you may not be familiar with it, but it was a horrible, devastating disease. It formed these pox marks on your face and your entire body, like chicken pox, which you may be a little bit more familiar with. So it swept through, high fevers, very sick. These pox were everywhere. They were very infectious. It could be easily spread. So when it came into a community, it was quickly spread from one person to another. There was a high mortality rate with it. I think it was up to maybe 50%. So a lot of people were dying from smallpox. Didn't have any ways to get rid of it. So doctors did the best they could. And then once you healed, if you did survive smallpox, these pox would make scarring. And so you could be very disfigured on your face and in your entire body. It would affect you for the rest of your life because, we're a very visual society. And when people look different, it makes it harder. Women who lost their beauty if they got smallpox, men who would have a hard time conducting business because of that. So smallpox was devastating, and they didn't have a good way to protect it. If you got it when you were young, you had a much more chance of surviving. It wasn't as severe if you got it when you were very young. If you got it as a teenager and an adult, it could be very devastating. A high mortality rate, and again, lots of scarring. When you're young, your skin is still regenerating very well, and you didn't have as much scarring. So what they would do is around the age of 2, they would actually give 2-year-olds smallpox. They would take some scrapings from the pox from someone who had it, and they would take it from a person who was recovering. So they had maybe a milder version, and they would take some scrapings that would actually cut the child's skin and rub that into the scrapings, and then they would quarantine all the children for about 2 weeks. This disease lasted about 2 weeks. They'd have a nurse who had already had smallpox stay with them, and they would just allow the disease to run its course. This is a practice called variolation. You give a person a disease at a certain time period so that you can control it. You can determine when you're going to get it and how you're going to take care of it. So that's what they would do. A lot of people would do this. So if you got it when you were young, then it would protect you. And they knew that if you got it when you were young, you wouldn't get it for the rest of your life. So this practice, again, is called variolation, and that's what they were doing. It was about the only thing they could do at the time. Not everybody was practicing it, but a lot of people were. Problem is that even when you were young, you could still die. The mortality rate when you were young was about 2%. So for every 100 kids that went through this process, 2 would die. And so when you actually talk about giving your child disease to protect them, that's very difficult. It still is very difficult, which is why we have so many issues with vaccines. You don't want to think that you're causing anyone to get a disease. So the mortality rate was still high. It wasn't a perfect thing. So back to Edward Jenner. He was familiar with this process. And he was living at this time period, and he wanted to see if they could do better. So smallpox, he was making some observations, and one thing he observed was that milkmaids, these were usually young girls and women who took care of the cows, they never got smallpox. And the whole village knew it. Smallpox came in, milkmaids would be like, oh, well, we won't get it because, we take care of the cows. They just never got it. He did notice that milkmaids would get a similar disease called cowpox that was easily transmitted from cows to humans. It was had some similarities to smallpox. It, fever and the pox marks, but it was not near as severe. Instead of 2 weeks, high fevers, high mortality rates, lots of scarring, you would be sick with mild fevers for a few days. You will have some pox that will heal, no scarring. It was a much milder disease. Now, this observation started him thinking, is the reason the milkmaids, the reason they don't get smallpox is because they had this disease, cowpox. So he wanted to test this out. Again, scientific, this was before before the good scientific method, but all scientists were testing things out. So what he did at the time was he had a neighbor boy named James, and he called James over and he said, hey, James, I want you to do something for me. May have gave him a little bit of money. I don't know what he bribed him with, but anyway, he called James over and he actually infected James with cowpox, made cut in his skin and took scrapings from the cowpox lesions from someone who had an active case, rubbed it in his skin, and then he sent James home. Probably his parents had no idea. I do not know, but sent James home. James did get cowpox. He quickly recovered, and then life moved on. Cowpox wasn't that big of a deal. A few weeks later, a month or so later, he called James again, and this time he inoculated James. He gave James scrapings from smallpox from a patient who actually had the disease, smallpox, deliberately infected James with the disease. Okay, so if I could see your faces, you're probably horrified about this point. But at this point in time, we did not have the ethical considerations that we do today. Today, you would have lots of forms to sign. There is, permissions and those kinds of things, which is as it should be. But back then, children weren't as well thought of in the community. This was very common types of practice for things going on back then. Again, today, that's another reason why we don't have a lot of medications for it's slower to get medications from children, is we don't like to test things on children. Until we make sure that they're absolutely safe in adults, and then we're cautious with that. Again, these are all things that should be done, but it wasn't what was going on at the time period. So poor James was given smallpox, sent home, but James did not get smallpox. The fact that he was inoculated, vaccinated with cowpox before being exposed to smallpox saved him. So this this was the first vaccine, and it differed in the fact that they used a different disease to protect against smallpox. Nowadays with vaccinations, we use parts of the pathogen, parts of the bacteria, or dead bacteria, or pieces of the virus, and we inoculate that. We give someone that so we can control it. What's happening in James and us is that our immune system sees it and reacts just like we saw the bad pathogen that's going to get us sick. However, it's not the bad pathogen, it's only a piece, and the pathogen can't make us sick. But our body responds like it would if we got it, makes these antibodies, immune system engages, and then once we make those antibodies, they stay around and protect us for the rest of our lives. This is how vaccination works. Great thing is about vaccination is side effects are much less. The mortality rate, remember 2 of those kids were dying when you gave them smallpox. This time mortality rate is very small, and it's a very safe, it's proven a very safe way to protect ourselves from these. We don't get smallpox anymore. Vaccinations eradicated that. We've been polio. We've got that down to just a couple of areas in the world that'll have an outbreak of polio. But the World Health Organization is got a goal to eradicate polio from that. Polio is a disease that swept through and would leave a high mortality rate and a lot of people paralyzed from that. Measles, we've got that relatively under control. Measles was a big cause of deafness in children. People who are elderly people where measles was still prevalent in our deaf communities. Many of them were deaf because of measles exposure as a child or as a teen or young adult. Now we do have a lot of controversy with vaccines. Are they safe? Are they going on? We have a lot of people that there was a study that came out in by Andrew Wakefield that posted a link between autism and the measles vaccine, the measles, mumps, and rubella. This came out, and of course it caused concern. Again, we're always looking to do the best from our patients, and so it caused a lot of concern at the time period. Doctors were looking. We don't want to do anything to harm our patients. Is this MMR vaccine causing autism? And so lots of studies went in after he published those initial findings, lots of doctors looking at it. They started repeating his studies. They started doing their own studies. The thing is, none of those studies saw the same connection that initial study was by Andrew Wakefield. Nobody else could repeat his results. Nobody else found similar results. They found no connection between the MMR vaccine and autism. So they went back to Andrew Wakefield, started really looking at his study, they found some inconsistencies. They explored further. They actually found that he falsified information. He falsified information. Maybe he thought he was doing what he thought was best, trying to push an agenda across. But either way, he falsified information. He was prosecuted for this. He lost his medical license from this. The paper was retracted. Many papers since then has come out saying that there is no link. But the damage was done, and the public lost a lot of trust in the medical professionals from this. And it's been very hard to gain back. There's been a lot of public pushback from this where people are against vaccines because, again, we don't want to do anything that harms our children. As these diseases started disappearing, then it was easy to say, oh, well, then I don't need to vaccine. Let me tell you the end of the story with little James. So Edward Jenner started vaccinating his patients, giving them cowpox, and then protecting them from smallpox. So the next wave of smallpox that would come through, his patients were protected. They didn't get smallpox. Pretty soon, we didn't see smallpox in that region. People came from miles away to come to Edward Jenner to get vaccinated. He spread this out. People were getting vaccinated. So people didn't get smallpox much anymore after vaccines because it was so successful. So what do you think happened? People stopped vaccinating. People are like, well, why should I do this? I haven't seen anybody with smallpox in years. We don't get it anymore. The church weighed in and said, oh, you're putting, horrible things in your body. Maybe you shouldn't do this. Lots of people weighed in, and people stopped vaccination. And guess what happened? Smallpox came back. So that's what we see now. Some of these diseases, our vaccination rates are dropping in this country, and some of these diseases that we had pretty much wiped out, like measles and whooping cough, are coming back. So it's a process. The biggest thing to help us with vaccinations, what's been proven, you can debate all you want to on Facebook or whatever. Usually you don't change any people's minds. The biggest thing that usually helps is showing them how bad these diseases are. We have forgotten how bad measles can be, and the deafness and the scarring that can occur, and the fatality. A lot of people are dying from this. So that's usually the medical professional's best offense against that. It's just reminding people how bad these diseases are. And that helps. All right, so I challenge you, go to your study groups and talk about this. This is a hot topic. You've got small groups that you could discuss this in. Put some things out there. I know because you are studying to be a nurse, you are your family and friends go-to for medical knowledge. And as that, you don't know much, but you know a little bit, and you're kind of responsible for spreading good information and well-researched information. So post in your study group, see what you think. I'll look at these because I want to hear your ideas and I want to hear what you think. Talk about it with each other and let's kind of have a little topical discussion on that. Okay, we'll end this video here and I'll pick you up at the next one.